Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. My name is John Bash. I'm the United States Attorney for the Western District of Texas. Soy el fiscal federal del Distrito Oeste de Texas. Joining me are Assistant Attorney General Eric Dreiband, who leads the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, and Special Agent in Charge Luis Quesada of the FBI's El Paso Field Office. Conmigo están Eric Dreiband, el Asistente Procurador General, que dirige la División de Derechos Civiles del el Departamento de Justicia, y el Agente Especial a Cargo, Luis Quesada, de la Oficina Local de FBI de El Paso. Our announcement today is tremendously important for both the people of the United States and the people of Mexico. For that reason, I'll deliver remarks first in English and then in Spanish, so we may go a little long, so bear with me. Nuestro anuncio de hoy es muy importante para la gente de los Estados Unidos y de México. Por esa razón, voy a hacer el anuncio primero en inglés y luego en español. On August 3rd of last year, at a Walmart in East Central El Paso, a man used a semi-automatic rifle to murder 22 people. He also shot 22 other people. The victims included citizens of both the United States and Mexico, as well as one citizen of Germany who was a resident of Mexico. Shortly before the attack, the gunman posted a manifesto online. In that manifesto, he called the attack a response to, quote, the Hispanic invasion of Texas. He claimed to be defending the United States from, quote, cultural and ethnic replacement brought on by the invasion. As I'm sure all of you know, the attack deeply scarred this community. On the morning after the attack, I explained that this horrific crime met the federal definition of domestic terrorism. It was an attempt to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, and I said that we would do at the Department of Justice what we always do to people who perpetrate terrorist attacks in this country. We would deliver swift and certain justice. Today marks a significant step in fulfilling that commitment. A few hours ago, a federal grand jury sitting here in El Paso returned a 90-count indictment against the Walmart shooter. That's 2 counts for each of the 44 innocent victims who were shot by the attacker, both those who survived and those who did not, as well as 2 additional counts for one of the other people he attempted to kill. The charges fall into 2 categories. First, the defendant is charged with 45 counts of murder or attempted murder under the federal hate crimes law, 1 for each of those victims I mentioned. The indictment alleges the defendant targeted the victims because of real or perceived national origin. Each of those 45 charges carries a maximum sentence of life in federal prison. Now, the federal hate crimes law I referred to is formally called the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act. That's named in honor of 2 murder victims who were targeted because of their sexual orientation and race, respectively. By charging the defendant under that law, we are vindicating the important federal interest in stopping crimes that are motivated by hatred of a particular group of people. I mentioned that there are other charges. The defendant has also been charged with 45 counts of using a firearm to commit a crime of violence. Again, 1 for each of the victims I mentioned. For the 23 charges relating to surviving victims, that charge carries a maximum sentence of life in federal prison. For the 22 charges relating to victims who did not survive, it carries a maximum penalty of death. Now, it's important to note that this federal indictment is distinct from the state indictment that was returned last September. That indictment charges 1 count of capital murder. That will be prosecuted by the state district attorney's office. Under our federal system of government, a person can be held liable for both federal and state crimes for the same act or set of acts. So in this case, both the federal and state prosecutions vindicate distinct but separate interests, and he will be prosecuted on parallel tracks in the federal and state cases. It's also important to recognize, as in all cases, that under our judicial system, a defendant is presumed innocent until proven guilty. That goes for this defendant just like any other. He's entitled to constitutionally effective assistance of counsel, and he's entitled to present any and all defenses to the jury. As I mentioned, 22 of the 90 counts carry a maximum penalty of death. We're going to follow DOJ's established protocol for deciding whether to recommend the death penalty to a jury. That involves, among other steps, discussions with defense counsel and consultation with the families of the deceased victims. Ultimately, it is Attorney General William Barr who will make the decision whether to seek the death penalty, and then, of course, at the end of the day, it is a jury that would decide whether to actually impose the death penalty. Earlier today, shortly before the indictment was returned, I met with the families of the deceased victims and the surviving victims. I explained what had occurred today with the indictment and discussed the process going forward. As the federal and state prosecutions proceed on parallel tracks, we are committed to working with the DA's office to minimize the stress on the victims throughout that process. The FBI has also created a website where victims and witnesses can go to get information about resources and services. We're going to give that to the press. Hopefully you guys put it in your stories, and we're also going to tweet it out so that it's available. This indictment is the product of extensive cooperation among federal, state, local law enforcement agencies. Immediately after the shooting, prosecutors from our office and Main Justice in Washington started working with the FBI, ATF, state and locals to thoroughly investigate the defendant and the attack. I'm deeply grateful to all those officials for their amazing work and dedication. I want to especially recognize District Attorney Jaime Esparza of El Paso and Police Chief Greg Allen of the El Paso Police Department. We all share the same goal here. That's to achieve justice for the victims and their families. I just want to make one further note. This year marks the 150th anniversary of the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice in 1870 was literally born into a country beset by racist violence. DOJ's first mission was fighting the newly formed Ku Klux Klan under Attorney General Ackerman. In the early 1870s, we brought numerous successful prosecutions against scores of Klan members. Now, in the 2020s, we face a resurgent threat of violence motivated by race, national origin, and other categories. But we're ready for this fight. DOJ was quite literally born for this fight. It's in our DNA. Everyone who serves in this department, from the Attorney General on down to the newest prosecutor, is committed to keeping all of our citizens and all visitors to this country safe from racist violence. All across the country, DOJ is going on offense against those who are plotting hate crimes, as we've seen in a lot of instances over the last year. Our top goal, of course, is always to stop threats before they materialize. But it's very difficult work, and it's made harder by the amount of racist propaganda online, which can inspire lone actors who don't have criminal records and don't have contacts with hate groups to commit atrocities. But we're not going to let up. Our resolve is firm. We're going to take the fight to the violent extremists, and we're going to win. I'll now offer remarks in Spanish and then turn over the podium to Assistant Attorney General Dreiband. El 3 de agosto del año pasado, en una tienda de Walmart en el centro oeste de El Paso, Texas, un hombre armado con un rifle semiautomático asesinó a 22 personas. También le disparó a otras 22 personas. Las víctimas incluyeron ciudadanos de los Estados Unidos y de México, así como un ciudadano de Alemania. Poco antes del ataque, el pistolero había publicado un manifiesto por la red. En ese manifiesto escribió que el ataque fue en sus palabras, respuesta a la invasión hispana de Texas. Dijo que estaba defendiendo a los Estados Unidos del, en sus palabras, reemplazo cultural y étnico provocado por la invasión. El ataque hirió profundamente a esta comunidad pacífica. La mañana siguiente al ataque, le expliqué que este horrible crimen cumplía con la definición legal de terrorismo doméstico. El ataque fue un intento de intimidar o coaccionar a una población civil. Y dije que haríamos lo que siempre hacemos en respuesta a los ataques terroristas en este país. Entregaríamos justicia rápida y segura al ofensor. Hoy marca un paso importante en el cumplimiento de ese compromiso. Hace unas horas, un gran jurado federal devolvió una denuncia de 90 cargos contra el tirador de Walmart. Hay 2 cargos por cada una de las 44 personas inocentes a las que el acusado disparó, tanto los que sobrevivieron como los que no. También hay 2 cargos adicionales para una de las otras personas que intentó asesinar. Los 90 cargos se dividen en 2 categorías. Primero, hay 45 cargos de asesinato o intento de asesinato bajo la Ley Federal de Crímenes de Odio, uno por cada víctima que mencioné. La denuncia alega que el acusado atacó a las víctimas debido a origen nacional, real o percibido. Cada uno de esos cargos tiene una sentencia máxima de cadena perpetua. También hay 45 cargos de usar un arma de fuego para cometer un delito de violencia. De nuevo, uno por cada víctima que mencioné. Para los 23 cargos relacionados con las víctimas sobrevivientes, la pena máxima es cadena perpetua. Para los 22 cargos relacionados con las víctimas que el acusado asesinó, la pena máxima es pena de muerte. Es importante entender que esta denuncia federal es distinta de la denuncia estatal devuelta en septiembre. La denuncia estatal alega un cargo de asesinato capital. El fiscal del distrito estatal va a procesar ese cargo. Bajo el sistema de gobierno de los Estados Unidos, un acusado puede ser considerado responsable por la comisión de delitos estatales y federales relacionados con un solo acto. También es importante entender que en nuestro sistema judicial, cada acusado se presume inocente hasta que se pruebe su culpabilidad. El acusado tiene derecho a una representación efectiva de un abogado y a que un jurado considere cualquier defensa. Como dije, 22 de los 90 cargos en la denuncia federal tienen una pena máxima de muerte. Vamos a seguir el protocolo establecido por el Departamento de Justicia para decidir si pedirle al jurado que imponga la pena de muerte. Entre otros pasos, vamos a tener conversaciones con el abogado del acusado y vamos a consultar con las familias de las víctimas fallecidas. Por final, el Procurador General de los Estados Unidos, William Barr, decidirá si buscaremos la pena de muerte. Y últimamente, un jurado decidiría si imponer la pena de muerte. Hoy, poco después de que el gran jurado devolvió la denuncia, me reuní con las víctimas sobrevivientes y las familias de las víctimas fallecidas. Le expliqué lo que había pasado y el proceso que vamos a seguir. A medida que avanzamos con este proceso, nos comprometemos a trabajar con la Oficina de Fiscal de Distrito Estatal para minimizar el estrés para las víctimas y las familias. El FBI ha creado un sitio web donde las víctimas o los testigos del ataque pueden conocer los diversos servicios y recursos disponibles para ellos. Vamos a dar la dirección del sitio web a la prensa y la voy a publicar en Twitter. Esta denuncia es el producto de cooperación entre las agencias federales, estatales y locales. Inmediatamente después del ataque, fiscales de nuestra oficina y la oficina principal del Departamento de Justicia en Washington comenzaron a trabajar con el FBI, la ATF y las agencias estatales y locales para investigar el ataque y el acusado. Estoy muy agradecido a todos estos funcionarios por su excepcional trabajo y su dedicación. Me gustaría reconocer especialmente al fiscal del Distrito Estatal, Jaime Esparza, y al jefe del Departamento de Policía de El Paso, Greg Allen. Todos compartimos el mismo objetivo, lograr justicia para las víctimas y las familias. Una cosa más, desde la fundación del Departamento de Justicia en 1870, hemos luchado contra la violencia racista. Cada persona que sirve en este departamento se compromete a proteger a todos nuestros ciudadanos y a todos los visitantes a nuestra nación de la violencia basada en el odio. Nuestro objetivo principal es siempre frustrar los ataques antes de que ocurran. Es un trabajo muy difícil debido a la proliferación de propaganda racista en la red que puede inspirar a actores solitarios para cometer atrocidades. Pero no vamos a ceder. Nuestra determinación es firme. Vamos a luchar a los extremistas violentos y vamos a ganar. I'll now turn the podium over to Assistant Attorney General Dreiband.
Thank you, John. Hello, my name is Eric Dreiband, and I am the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the United States Department of Justice. As Assistant Attorney General, I head the Department's Civil Rights Division, which works with our federal partners, including United States Attorney John Bash and his team in the Western District of Texas, and Special Agent in Charge Luis Quesada of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's El Paso offices. I'm very grateful to U.S. Attorney Bash, SAC, Quesada, and their teams for their outstanding work. We also work with state and local law enforcement, and I'm especially thankful for the exceptional work by El Paso Police Chief Greg Allen, the El Paso Police Department, and District Attorney Jaime Esparza. As Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, it is both my duty and my privilege to enforce the federal civil rights laws, and with our dedicated law enforcement colleagues, to protect the civil rights of all persons in our country. Our nation is dedicated to the proposition that all of us are created equal and that we are endowed with certain unalienable rights, including the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is the duty of the government to secure these rights, and one way we do so is by enforcing federal hate crimes laws. Attorney General William Barr has instructed us that the Department of Justice has no higher priority than to protect the safety and security of our country. Today, we announce hate crime charges. In doing so, we and the grand jury allege that the defendant killed 22 people, injured dozens of others, and terrorized many more people. Today, we and the grand jury allege that the defendant committed these federal hate crimes and that he committed these violent crimes to frighten and intimidate the Hispanic community. Hate crimes physically wound and psychologically harm victims. Such crimes seek to intimidate innocent people and groups of people because of who they are. These horrific crimes may leave many people feeling terrorized, isolated, and vulnerable. Federal hate crime charges thus carry a significant value. They recognize that a violent crime was both an attack against specific victims and also an attack against a particular population. Federal hate crime charges affirm to all members of our communities that they are valued, that their protection matters, and that we will protect them and their rights. People in our nation have the right to go to a store on a Saturday morning without fear that they will be shot and killed because of who they are or where they are from. As the grand jury alleges, the defendant tried to terrorize an entire community. This will not stand. The Department of Justice will continue to fight these acts of hatred both here in El Paso and across our entire country. This hate crime may be considered an act of domestic terrorism, as have other hate crimes throughout our history, like the violence wrought by white supremacists and the Ku Klux Klan. And, as in every such case, we will commit the resources and full authority of the Department of Justice to combat these heinous crimes. The Department of Justice has brought hate crime charges in other communities that, like El Paso, tragically suffered hate-motivated violence. For example, we brought hate crime charges in Pittsburgh for the killings at the Tree of Life Synagogue. We convicted and obtained the ultimate penalty against the man who senselessly murdered African-American worshipers at the Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina. Here in El Paso, we will seek justice for the victims, and we will prosecute the defendant to the full extent of the law. We stand committed to enforcing the hate crime laws everywhere within our jurisdictions. We remain devoted to protecting the unalienable rights of all people throughout our great nation, including especially those of the victims of this crime, their friends and families, and this community. Thank you, and I now turn the podium over to Luis Quesada, the FBI Special Agent in charge of the FBI's El Paso office. Thank you, Luis.
Good afternoon, and thank you for coming today. My name is Luis Quesada. I'm the Special Agent in charge of the El Paso Field Office. Although I did not arrive in El Paso until after the dreadful events of August 3rd, my family and I mourned for the victims, the families, and the community of El Paso, along with all of us at the FBI and millions across the nation and the world. Over the last 4 months since my arrival, I have seen firsthand how the men and women of the FBI El Paso division were deeply affected both personally and professionally by this tragedy. That said, throughout the course of their official duties, FBI personnel have retained a focused, intense, unwaveringly inexhaustible dedication to this investigation. Today's federal indictment bears the fingerprints of numerous law enforcement professionals and is the culmination of thousands of hours of investigative and analytical efforts by the FBI and its partners to seek justice for the victims and accountability for these crimes. Notably, more than 130 FBI personnel coming from our FBI headquarters and other field offices throughout the nation directly supported this investigation, in addition to over 250 personnel from the El Paso FBI office. Our Victim Services Unit, or as we like to refer to them, our angels on the ground, immediately deployed the full range of their expertise with those of their partners to meet the direct needs of the victims, families, and witnesses. And more importantly, they continue to do so today. As mentioned in August, a critical source of our success in this investigation was the direct support from the FBI's Domestic Terrorism Hate Crimes Fusion Cell, which brings together subject matter experts from our Criminal Investigative Division and our Counterterrorism Division. The Fusion Cell helped ensure the rigorous sharing of information between the FBI and our colleagues at the El Paso Police Department. The charges announced today would not have been possible without this information sharing and this partnership. And while I wish this investigation was never opened, I am very proud of the work done by the FBI and our counterparts that brings us here today. The attack on August 3rd, an act of domestic terrorism manifested as a hate crime, was designed to use violence to intimidate the Hispanic community and El Paso as a whole. This tragedy, however, showed the world the special strength of the El Paso community, a community that cares deeply for its own citizens as family. At the same time, it opens its arms to newcomers and treats them as family without hesitation. The FBI here in El Paso is steeled in our commitment to continue working together on a local, state, and federal level to do everything we can to protect the community we're so fortunate to serve. I will now make my comments in Spanish. Buenas tardes y gracias por asistir el día de hoy. Mi nombre es Luis Quesada, soy el agente especial a cargo de la oficina del Paso, aquí del FBI en El Paso. Aunque yo no llegué a El Paso hasta después de los lamentables hechos ocurridos el 3 de agosto, mi familia y yo estuvimos de luto por las víctimas, sus familias y la comunidad de El Paso. Al igual que con cada uno de nosotros en el FBI y los millones de personas más a través del país y del mundo entero. Durante los últimos 4 meses desde mi llegada a esta ciudad, he visto primera mano cómo los hombres y mujeres de la oficina del FBI en El Paso han sido afectados profundamente, tanto personal como profesionalmente, por esta tragedia. Dicho esto, a través del curso de sus responsabilidades profesionales, el personal del FBI ha estado enfocado intensamente, firmes, incansables, dedicado a esta investigación. La acusación formal federal de hoy lleva sus huellas de muchos profesionales policíacos y es la culminación de miles de horas de investigación y análisis, llevado a cabo por el FBI y sus asociados, para buscar justicia para las víctimas y contabilidad por estos crímenes. Notablemente, más de 130 empleados del sede del FBI y oficinas de campo a través del país apoyaron directo esta investigación, además de los más de 250 empleados de la oficina del FBI aquí en El Paso. La unidad de servicios a las víctimas del FBI, nuestros ángeles en la tierra, como afectuosamente nos referimos a ellos, desplegaron toda clase de expertos, al igual que nuestros asociados, para guiar directamente a las víctimas, familiares, testigos, en cuanto fue necesario. Pero lo más importante, ellos continúan esta asistencia hasta el día de hoy. Como mencionamos en agosto, el apoyo que recibimos de la Célula de Integración de Información de Terrorismo Doméstico y los delitos motivados por el odio del FBI fue una fuente fundamental en el éxito que obtuvimos en este caso. Esta célula de integración unió a expertos en la materia de división de investigaciones criminales y la división de contraterrorismo. Esta célula de integración aseguró que pudiéramos tener un sistema riguroso de intercambio de información entre los colegas del FBI y el Departamento de Policía de El Paso. No hubiera sido posible anunciar los cargos que se han anunciado hoy de no ser por el intercambio de información y la colaboración existente. Y aunque es mi deseo que nunca hubiéramos tenido que abrir este tipo de investigación, estoy orgulloso del trabajo realizado por el FBI y por nuestros colaboradores, el cual nos une en el día de hoy. El ataque ocurrido el 3 de agosto, un acto de terrorismo doméstico que se manifestó como un delito motivado por el odio. Fue diseñado para utilizar violencia a modo de intimidar la comunidad hispana y El Paso en su totalidad. Sin embargo, esta tragedia les mostró al mundo la fortaleza especial que tiene la comunidad de El Paso, una comunidad que se preocupa profundamente por sus propios ciudadanos y familiares. A la misma vez, extiende sus brazos y reciben a los recién llegados. La oficina del FBI en El Paso reafirma su compromiso de continuar trabajando conjuntamente al nivel local, estatal, federal, para hacer todo lo posible para proteger la comunidad que nosotros orgullosamente servimos. Muchas gracias.
We'll take some questions now. Sir?
Mr. Bash, this could be to all of you. You noted in your remarks that the motive that the alleged gunman gave dealt with the Hispanic invasion of Texas, and he was responding to the Hispanic invasion of Texas. And you said that the Justice Department is following in its long tradition of protecting people against hate crimes like that. A lot of Hispanic leaders in the immediate aftermath of the shooting and up to this day have noted that the rhetoric used by the gunman was closely matched rhetoric that came from the top of the government, including the President of the United States. So I'm just wondering how you would tell Hispanics who have been living in fear since this shooting that they will be protected given the rhetoric that comes from the top of the administration.
Well, what we prosecute is crimes of violence. We don't prosecute speech. And what I could say to the Hispanic community is that the Justice Department is totally engaged in stopping people who, for whatever motivation, but in particular for hateful motivations, would plot acts of violence on other people. This indictment reflects that. It reflects the only person who is responsible for this, which is the mass shooter, and we're going to bring him to justice.
Thanks for being here, sir. Days after the shooting, the Mexican government was very adamant they want to be a part of the investigation. They want to be involved and kept abreast of new developments. Can you summarize your communication with Mexican officials throughout the last 6 months?
Well, I'm not going to go into detail, but we have met with Mexican officials during the course of this investigation, and our goal is to keep them as informed as possible, consistent with our legal and ethical obligations.
Just to follow up on international cooperation, at any point in this process, have we communicated with New Zealand or Norwegian officials, kind of following the thread of inspiration from these different attackers?
Well, I don't want to get into all our discussions, but what I will say is we have consulted with prosecution teams and investigation teams that have worked on similar cases to garner their insight in how we should proceed in this case. I'm not going to go into specific conversations, though.
Specifically, the New Zealand case, where do you draw the line and say that these people are totally disconnected, or that this is a lone wolf attack when they're inspired from one another, even if they're not hanging out around?
Well, our goal here is to prosecute a person for a mass shooting. We have certain elements we need to prove. We need to prove that he shot people, that he killed people, and what his motivation behind that was. And so we're focused on proving those elements. And there are broader aspects of the policy discussion and the overall approach of the Department of Justice and the FBI on stopping these attacks in the future. But in terms of the sorts of conversations we've had, we've been focused on making sure this person receives justice.
Robert Levine with KFOX 14. With the understanding that every case is different, of course, I remember your news conference, I believe it was the day after the shooting, when you said your office would absolutely be pursuing these charges. If you could explain just a little bit in terms of the 6-month delay to bring the charges. I'm not sure that delay is the right word to characterize it, but if you could explain the process of arriving at this day.
Well, 6 months certainly isn't unusual, even for an ordinary case in our office between the crime and the indictment. Oftentimes it's much longer than that. And in this case, where you have a huge amount of evidence and complexity to it, where, of course, the defendant is not at large, our goal was to take the time we needed to get this right. And getting this right means preparing ourselves to present the best possible case to a jury if it goes to a trial, also making sure we respect the defendant's constitutional rights because we want to do this the right way under the law. So 6 months is not an unusual amount of time between crime and indictment, and we want swift and certain justice, but part of that is certain. We want to make sure we do everything right in this case. So,
You mentioned the DOJ is facing a resurging threat to the racism and this type of violence. What does the DOJ attribute that resurgence to?
well, I can't speak for what the DOJ as a whole attributes that to. All I know is we're firing on all cylinders and stopping this. I mean, hate crimes, the Attorney General has talked about this a lot. We're going to stop hate crimes. Our job is to investigate them, hopefully break up threats before they occur, and when they do occur, when attacks do occur, prosecute people to the fullest extent of the law. So that's what we're focused on. Yeah.
What was the response of the families like today when you talked to them?
I'm definitely not going to get into discussions with families. That's a huge privacy issue for us. But it is a wonderful group of people, and it's just so difficult to think about this happening to that group of people.
Mr. Rashi, if you can just, you said that both trials, both prosecutions will be working kind of like concurrently or timely, and of course with the sensitivity of the families, is it gonna be remaining in custody of the state, or is it gonna be moved over to federal custody? How's that gonna work? How's that being discussed already?
We're actively discussing those sorts of issues with the district attorney. The district attorney is doing a wonderful job in this case, and we're working, together closely on making sure those sort of logistical issues get smoothed out. In terms of when the trials will be, who goes first, that's really ultimately probably up to the judges in the case and when they want to schedule trials. So it's not something we know at this time. But we're going to work closely with the district attorney. As I mentioned in my comments, highest priority there, besides doing everything right legally, is making sure we minimize stress for the families, because this can be a stressful process even if there's only one case. If there's two cases, it can be very stressful. So our goal is to minimize stress with the families, and I know that the district attorney shares that goal.
So just to clarify the number of victims, 45, 46?
So we have identified 45 victims in the indictment. 44 of those who suffered are people who suffered some sort of gunshot wound, whether it's straight on or shrapnel wound. There's an additional victim named, but of course in a case like this, with a mass shooting, the ripples of victims go out almost infinitely. I mean, there's not only everyone who suffered a wound, there's people who injured themselves fleeing, there are families of every victim, there are people who suffered emotional trauma, there's our community, there's our nation. And when you're putting together an indictment, you're striking a balance between making sure you seek as much vindication and accountability as possible while also having a presentable case to a jury. And with something this large, it's that balance that you try to achieve.
The fund created here locally said there were 26 wounded. So your numbers are 22 shot and killed, 22 more shot, and then the 23rd is just the youth?
I'm not going to comment on the 23rd, but the first two things you said about the 22 shot and killed and 22 wounded from gunfire is correct. And as I mentioned, there are others who are wounded, for example, spraining an ankle or bruising themselves fleeing. For various reasons, partly relating to the kind of elements we need to prove in this case. Those are not named in the indictment. Yeah.
¿Nos podrías explicar en español si este caso se llevaría a cabo aquí o se movería como se tiene planeado mover en el lado estatal?
I'm going to need some help from our translator.
Yes. The question is, do you think the trial will take place here, or will there be a change of venue?
So that's ultimately, sí, es una decisión para el juez en el caso. No sabemos ahora. El juez va a decidir.
Mr. Bash, in your press conference the day after the shooting, you talked about your personal ties talk a little bit more about that and whether that motivates you any differently than if it had been a crime that occurred in a city that you had no connection to?
Well, we treat all crimes seriously, the most minor crimes and the most serious crimes. It doesn't matter if the prosecutor is from that area, but certainly at an emotional level for me personally, and just thinking about this case and dealing with it, I lived here when I was very young. My mom grew up here. She went to Loretto. My grandmother still lives here. She's 92. My father was stationed here at Fort Bliss when I was young. My uncle grew up here. So you just think about this community. We've come back here to visit a lot because of family. And it is such a welcoming, peaceful community. I think you all the local media here, certainly know that. You can walk down the street, people say hi. It's we have a extremely low crime rate for any city of this size in the United States. It's a wonderful place, and you don't want something like this to happen anywhere. I mean, but it's just when you step back and think about it, it's unbelievable something like this happening here. Try not to think about that too much because it's incredibly depressing to think about what happened. But it's also motivation to get justice in this case.
If I remember correctly, on August 7th, when the president visited here at the 911 center, he told you to get the job done. How much over the last 6 months, if at all, has the president discussed this with you? Whether, I know you can't get into specifics, but how much has he discussed this with you?
I don't want to talk about anyone I've discussed cases with. I would refer you, there's Department of Justice of policies about White House contact with U.S. attorneys, and you can check out that policy. But I'm not going to talk about internal discussions with anyone.
Perhaps this question is best suited for Mr. Dreiband. In terms of a lack of domestic terror laws to pursue, can you explain how important it would be for the persecution, or the prosecution rather, of civil rights violations might fill in some of the vacuum for people who are wondering why wasn't this person charged as a domestic terrorist?
We prosecute crimes after Congress passes a statute and authorizes us to do so. So whether or not Congress decides to pass a new domestic terrorism statute is up to the Congress. In this case, we have ample statutory authority under the Shepard-Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act to prosecute the defendant here and to seek full justice. And as Mr. Bash said, the crimes at issue here carry both penalties of, if convicted, potentially of life imprisonment and the death penalty. So we're confident that we have, in this case, sufficient statutory authority to seek and achieve justice.
Okay, we'll take 2 more questions, if anyone has any. Okay, seeing no hands. Oh,
Mr. Dreiband, could you take a shot at some of these policy questions about the international nexus of nationalists and white nationalists? These, the inspiration from New Zealand, for example, and how is the government seeking to protect people, keeping an eye on the international connections of these threats?
Well, much of what we do is through investigations by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and they do a terrific job at investigating and trying proactively to identify potential hate crimes and schemes and conspiracies to commit these kind of acts. And if, in the appropriate case, we develop the evidence, we will charge and have charged people prior to the acts actually taking place. And I would encourage you to look at a case out of Colorado called United States versus Holzer, which we charged very recently. In that case, with the FBI, we were able to stop a hate crime before it happened, arrested and charged the defendant, and are prosecuting that case. So we work extensively with the FBI and with local law enforcement, and we work internationally with international law enforcement as well as appropriate. A lot of what we see are things where individuals become radicalized on the internet. Very often these individuals are isolated people who, through online trolling of the internet, find a community or a quasi-community on the internet in which they become inspired to do the kind of things that can tragically result in hate crimes. Obviously, I can't reveal our investigative techniques, but it is something that the Justice Department, both the United States Attorney's Office here in El Paso, but the FBI, the Civil Rights Division, the Justice Department as an institution are working very hard and very thoroughly on. So, thank you. Yeah.
Sir, what are you guys doing, not only here in El Paso, but throughout the southwestern United States, to protect and guarantee that something like this will happen in Hispanic communities?
We are prosecuting this case and we will prosecute to the full extent of the law any other hate crime within our jurisdiction anywhere in the United States. We will not tolerate hate-motivated violence against the Hispanic community in El Paso or anywhere else in the country, and we will bring the full weight of the Justice Department to bear against anyone who commits such a crime.
I guess I would just add to that on closing, both before and after the shooting, I know from working with our local FBI, both here in El Paso and the office in San Antonio, they are constantly processing a stream of threats. Some of them are hate-based, some of them are just based on other things, a school shooter without a particular ideological motivation, and there's a constant process of assessment. Is this somebody serious? Is this somebody who's just joking online? And the FBI and other law enforcement agencies are extraordinarily geared up to process those threats, analyze them. That's happening behind the scenes all the time to try to prevent people from doing these attacks. It can be difficult. It's not always clear a threat is a crime, or something that seems like it might be a threat is a crime. But they are working very hard to figure out who is plotting an attack and stop that attack before it happens. Thank you all very much for being here today. We appreciate your time.